Good evening, Brendan.
Oliver, how's it going? And like lots of things this week, the internet seemed to be failing on me here. I'm not sure is it some master plan to keep us off the air, but we're here now anyway, thankfully.
I tell you what, Brendan, it only started working when we said we'd play some K-pop videos.
All right, of course. Well, I've got my collection here ready and waiting to go. How are things down that neck of the woods? Of course, we'll be getting into all of this in more detail, but is it fairly calm outside your window?
Very much so. Police, the local police station parks just across from me, and things look like they're absolutely fine, absolutely okay.
Okay, well, as I said, we are going to get into this. There's really only one topic in town this week, guys, and with the week we've had across the country, the focus for tonight's Bogotá Nights, remember, it is Colombia's only live and interactive English language chat show. While it's on the still ongoing protest, pretty much all major urban centres have been affected by this Paro Nacional, or national strike, if you will. And with the delivery of essential supplies now being hit in some areas, the question is, for how much longer are these protests going to last? Or perhaps the more pertinent question is, for how much longer will those not on the streets tolerate the situation? While controversial tax reform proposals may have been the spark that ignited this latest wave of protests, the brutality by the state security forces has now very much taken centre stage for many of those still taking to the streets. Depending on whose figures you read, we've had either over 20 or over 30 protest-related deaths. Opinion, unsurprisingly enough, is divided on what we've witnessed over the last 9 days. And we want to hear your thoughts. Have you been actively protesting? If so, what have your experiences been like? Have you witnessed acts of police aggression? Are you behind the protest movement in general, but upset by the acts of vandalism we've seen? Is it time to ease off and see what comes of the talks planned between the government and strike leaders? Or are you completely against the protests? Have state authorities been provoked into acting the way they have? Send your messages to us right now by using the live comment facility, and they will appear here on our screen. Or if you're watching this recorded, you can still get involved by commenting on where you're viewing or via tweet, the handle being at Bogotá Post with the hashtag Bogotá Nights. This show is all about viewer interaction, after all, guys, so do send us your thoughts. Ollie, though, where exactly are we at right now with these protests? Has today, day 9, as I mentioned, has it been calmer compared to what's gone before?
Yes, very much so. Today, I think, is a day where peace has, let's not speak too quickly, but peace appears more or less to have broken out for a short period. So the protests today were small. I don't want to say insignificant, but they certainly weren't. They certainly weren't significant, let's say, on the scale that we've seen in recent days. Coupled with that, tragic news in the morning. Breaking last night, but really available this morning regarding the young man, Lucas. That's in development, and again, it's not really clear exactly what's happened there. We've got this thing down in Cali. I'm sure you've seen the story and the videos. Again, there's kind of, it's very hard to know what's going on. There's a very clear narrative from the people who originally posted the video, and the police have now got their own narrative. And as ever, we're stuck in the position of wondering who to believe.
Yeah, we spoke this day last week when the big 28th of April day that was signposted well in advance had already taken place. And then there were problems in Cali, and of course Cali was the epicenter and in many ways still is. But the problem has been then, as I mentioned in the introduction, this police brutality, which of course is nothing new to us here, particularly in Bogotá, even though this time things have been far calmer in inverted commas here in terms of fatalities. But as long as we're going to have these deaths, and as you said, we woke this morning to the news of the death of a protester in Pereira. So as long as these deaths and this police brutality and however it's happening, whoever is behind it all, it's difficult to see this going away. Usually there's something happens. Like in September, it kind of all died down, and then the coronavirus pandemic became the focus of attention once again. Like, what's going to be the catalyst that makes this calm down, or will it, or like what can we expect? I guess I'm asking you to glaze into your crystal ball.
No idea. I mean, look, without wanting to be facetious or flippant, yeah, no idea. I mean, look, this could go the same way as the 2019 protests went. It could go the same way that the September protests in 2020 went. It could just keep going. I mean, at this stage, I think it's really a fool's errand. If you ask me really to pick, I'd say what I think is most likely is that it'll start to peter out. And there are a lot of caveats and a lot of ifs to this, but if the police calm down, if police and military stop killing and brutalizing people, if the government is relatively honest about, attempting to dialogue with protesters, and if they retire or take away the Reforma di Salud, then I think it's just going to peter away. I think some people will stay out on the streets, but they'll just dwindle in number because people just, they can come out for one day, but coming out sort of every week becomes tiring, becomes difficult. It becomes a little bit just too much for everyone. And as you say, Brendan, we wouldn't be talking about this now if the police hadn't massively escalated things at the weekend in Cali. Without that action, there wouldn't be strikes this week. We'd be waiting for the middle of the month.
Yeah, because let's be clear, just in case people aren't too familiar with what exactly the reason of these strikes, the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, so to put it, what was this these tax reform proposals. But there were protests planned anyway for a whole myriad of reasons. Mm-hmm. But they've now been withdrawn, these proposals, which, as I said, I wrote an article today where I think had it not been, that was kind of very close to the 28th of April, these tax proposals came out and it just kind of, it got everyone's backs up, no matter if you were a Strato 1 or a Strato 6. Not that I'm saying those in a Strato 6 are out protesting, far from it. They let somebody else do the donkey work.
No, I wouldn't be so sure about that.
Well, go on. Find me in a Strato 6 person that's out protesting. Or if there's somebody from a Strato 6 listening, do write in or watching and let us know. Have you been out protesting or are you against them? And of course, we do want to get your comments on that. Are you pro or against these protests? But yeah, so the tax reform is taken off the table. So you kind of go, well, okay, that's been the big thing. The government has sacked the minister who was in charge for that, the Minister of Finance, brought in a new guy, Restrepo, who was at the commercial industry and tourism portfolio. So they've done that, and that was the big thing. But then it's because of it, once again, police violence or whoever's behind it and these deaths. And that's where people are just saying, we can't have that. We have a right to protest. But you've that side of it, and the right of people to protest peacefully, versus images that the likes of RSN are very quick to show us on their headlines every lunchtime at 12:30 when I happen to be in my panaderia, of all the vandalism. That's what they tend to lead with. And of course, people kind of go, but they're only focusing on the vandalism. But you made, the point last week that it's obvious they're going to focus on that. I mean, when you see images of hooded guys, balaclavas almost on them, firing petrol bombs into bus stations or whatever it was, the metro bus, I think, in Medellin. I mean, it's a striking image, and people are going to remember that, and they're going to go, well, these guys aren't protesters, they're just thugs.
Well, and it's important. I mean, that's why the protesters do it. The protesters do it to get attention, to say that, that they're serious, that they're prepared to take extreme actions. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and condone violence in all its forms. I think that's a ridiculous point of view to take. There's plenty of examples where violence has been used in revolutions and movements that have turned out to be very important in the end. However, if that's your tactic, that's fine, but you can't go around setting a bus on fire to gain attention and then complain because you're gaining attention. That's not how that works. Like, I do understand the frustration. If you're somebody who doesn't believe in violent means towards an end, and other people affiliated with you do believe in violence and go out and commit it, I can understand that's very frustrating. I absolutely, I understand that. But you certainly can't, I don't think you can blame the media for choosing those images. But let's come back to what you were saying there. Because absolutely, Brendan, we were here last week, and what were we saying? We're saying it's a perfect outcome for the government. They've got their pictures of vandals. It's not popularly supported. The one part of it that does have popular support was the tax reform, was tumbling the tax reform. They withdrew that themselves on Thursday. They looked in a really strong position. And nothing really kicked off on Thursday last week. Nothing really kicked off on Friday last week. Saturday, a little bit tasty. And then just out of nowhere, this absurdly hard line by police, and it appears military, on Cali. And that just re-energizes the protests, and rightly so. If you've got state actors going around killing innocent civilians, of course that's going to make people unhappy.
Now, those who might be more on the side of, in inverted commas, official law and order, i.e. the police and the military, which of course have taken to the streets across a number of Colombia's biggest cities, including here in Bogotá, will say, and we talked about this yesterday, Ollie, that in this country you just can't rule anything in or out, but that there are people planted in these protests, leftist agitators or whatever, and there's organized criminal gangs behind this, stirring all this along, so that really, the police, in a sense, have to fight fire with fire, quote unquote, there. But so in this country, you couldn't rule that out either. We remember the November 2019 protests, where there were some really strange videos of, it was difficult to know. What we saw, apparently police jeeps, trucks and things dropping loads of plainclothes people off at housing estates and complexes and telling them to go in and raiding these places. Video this week of a couple of police officers on their motorbikes with plainclothes guys again on the back, and they pull up to this little park where there's a football field and start attacking two lads sitting on a bench. I mean, again, there's absolutely no context. It's all social media content, and you don't know what's happening. But strange things seem to be happening at these protests, and we don't know. So like those who are kind of on the side of, look at the vandalism. Okay, so there are the majority, even they will say, of the protesters are peaceful, but you've got these rogue elements in them, and it gives them a license to do what they like, to loot and to fire petrol bombs wherever they want to, and it really kind of just takes away from the whole movement then.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like, it's interesting that you referenced 2019. We still don't really know what happened. And for anybody who's listening who wasn't in Colombia a year and a half ago, there were big protests on a Wednesday, might have been a Thursday. Big protests. Everything got a little bit out of hand. And then on the Friday night, they suddenly announced a curfew. And then absolutely out of nowhere, we had an absolutely bizarre night where, and I just don't know how to explain this, but groups of people went into some housing. What do they call them? There's an American name, condominiums. Went into kind of condominiums, bigger sort of housing sort of estates. People went in and were maybe trying to steal stuff, or maybe not, and they might have been armed, or they weren't, and maybe some estates were attacked, but others weren't, and it was all extremely confusing. What we definitely know is something happened. What we don't really know is how many estates were attacked, and critically, who this was behind it. And again, when you come back to that idea and you say, look, Brendan, if somebody said to me, if somebody starts saying false flag to me in America, talking about anything in America, I just think, this person's off the wall. Tinfoil hat, this person's a conspiracy loon, what are they talking about? In Colombia, with the history of the falsos positivos and various other incidents, it's not unbelievable, let's put it that way.
Yeah, you really can't rule anything in or out. I mean, and even just look, again, as I mentioned at the start, depending on who you follow and whose figures you read, we don't even have an exact number, which I would have thought would have been relatively easy to find out the number of fatalities in these protests. But we've got the Defensoría del Pueblo saying like a number just over 20, and a couple of non-governmental organizations saying over 30. So there's a difference of 10 there. I mean, I don't really know how that can be the case either if we can't get agreement on the number of fatalities.
But I mean, I've seen people in posts, claiming up to 50. And again, look, it's not unlikely that those will rise. We've got lots of missing people. Of course, we'd have to expect some of the missing people may turn up dead. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we've just got these massively different figures all over the shop. And it's so hard to sort of get reality from fiction. I mentioned the Cali case earlier. Do you trust the police spokesperson who says, look, what happened is we were taking, people were complaining about intimidation from armed gangs, and so the police got attacked, and we took them away in our truck to avoid escalating the situation. You've got a bunch of people who made the videos saying there's, people in civilian, mufti outfits jumping off the side of a camion and starting to shoot into the protesters. Now, these are basically polar opposites. Who's telling the truth?
Well, as they say, there's three sides to every story, so I guess it might be somewhere in the middle. But the other thing is, like we said, we still don't have the answers to what happened in 2019, so we'll probably never know. Like there's the other things going on, and I saw a few people were engaged in the expat pages on Facebook about like the internet apparently being deliberately cut in Cali during some of these protests, so people couldn't post videos.
But again, this is a really good example of how things get legs. So, look, there's definitely, what we definitely know, the internet definitely went down in Cali, and depending on who you want to believe, it was either a collapse of the network through overuse, a deliberate cutting by security forces, or damage to an underground cable. All three of those are believable. There's a lot of championing of the NetBlocks report. But what the NetBlocks report seems to say, certainly the most recent that I read, what it seems to say is simply that there was definitely a blockage of the system. That they heavily insinuate that was through external actors, but they don't seem to fully confirm it.
Okay.
So, again, but again, that's been now amplified up. So everybody that loses connection at any point in the day is immediately saying, "Oh, well, I'm being censored. Oh, they're cutting my internet. They're cutting my data." Every single person who posts an image on Facebook, which anybody would tell you, that image is going to get censored. It's showing a man heavily bleeding with heavy injuries. That's going to get censored. The same way as Facebook censors images on the bicycle groups that I follow, when people try to post pictures of a serious injury where you can see exposed bones and the like. Again, there's no surprise there. And then, of course, you look at things like people spamming. So there's lots of people just copying and pasting onto absolutely anything. So a Kim Kardashian post or a K-pop video or whatever, and they're just copying and pasting, a 6 different language, SOS Colombia, here's the reality of what's happening, blah, blah, blah. Now, I think they think they're doing something good. But of course, the algorithms on Facebook just go, what is this? This is in 6 different languages, and it's exactly the same text posted over multiple things that have no connection. That looks very much like advertising spam. Block it. And more insidiously, it then goes, is there anything which looks similar to this? We're going to try and block that also. So in a way, I mean, some of this is very, very predictable. On the other hand, I wouldn't necessarily rule anything out.
You could say sitting on the fence there, Ollie, but no, I understand. You can't.
Well, I'm saying, yes, I would actually. I'd say actually, I don't think standing on the fence is a bad position to be in. I don't think there's anything wrong with sitting on the fence if we don't know what's on either side of that fence.
Certainly, yeah. You've got alligators on one side of it and piranhas on the other, or something like that. You mentioned K-pop, though, Ollie, and people may not get the reference, because there have been hackers involved in this as well, or at least I've seen allegations of that the Ministry of Defence was hacked, their Twitter account or something over the week. But the K-pop thing is kind of in that mold, isn't it?
Yeah, so there's 2 parts to this. One is that some K-poppers are supporting. K-pop's quite big here, so there's a lot of Colombian K-poppers who have international friends. 2 things happening. Number one, there's a load of K-poppers basically hijacking all the anti-protest tweets. So all the no más vándalos, that sort of thing. It's being put on K-pop videos so that it kind of detracts from the... so that it detracts attention. If you try to follow No Más Vandalos, instead of getting a whole bunch of tweets from horrific right-wingers, you instead suddenly just get a K-pop video and you think, what the hell? Well, what am I doing here? The other point to that, is that they seem to be putting out some support. Coming back to the websites, all hacked, Brendan, all hacked. But I think what's really interesting here is I've got a lot of students who point blank refuse to believe anything the government says or any government organisation. But equally, whatever Anonymous says, they will absolutely assume is true.
Again, I guess people pick their medium and go with it in many cases. So it doesn't really... you could tell them, look, that's black. It's not red. But if they say it's black, they'll say it's black, and that's the case. Perhaps on a similar note, Angela, our good friend, Angela AF, which I won't repeat. But figures, thanks for the message. And her message is, figures are obscure because the institutions that should be watching over these claims are not really counterbalancing the government. People no longer trust these institutions, Fiscalía, the Procuraduría. Can I throw in the Defensoría del Pueblo? Is that part of the government as well, or is that independent? And the IAs are directed by people who are definitely not interested in making the government look bad. Ollie, discuss?
Well, first thing, I would absolutely agree with Angela. I don't think there's anything wrong at all with not trusting government figures. I think that's, in fact, a very sensible thing to do. I'd say you're insane if you simply followed official government figures. On the other hand, I don't think the counterpoint is you definitely can't trust the government, therefore anything that contradicts the government must be instantly true, regardless of what they say. The truth could be somewhere in the middle. It reminds me of an old maxim, Brendan, that we used to say in England: whenever we have a big protest, the police will say a very small number attended, the organisers will say a very large number attended, and if you go between the two, if you find the midpoint, you're usually in roughly the right land.
Yeah, I think that's a fair maxim for pretty much everything in life, and certainly things that are disputed.
But just to make a thing, just the more comments we can get, the better. Thank you, Angela, and I see Richard here as well. I'm sure we'll move on to that in a minute. But remember, guys, it's this show really, you make it or break it by sending in messages. So we're really keen to hear what you think, what you feel, what you've seen, what you've heard.
Yeah, I was going to say SOS Bogotá Nights, we need your messages. Not being facetious on that, though. But also, when you were talking about trusting government, something came into my head: weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Guaranteed job. You could go to war on that, couldn't you? Ollie, I want to come back, though, to the grievances in this, because we mentioned the tax reforms, which have now been scrapped, and I'm sure we're going to hear this again, because as sure as night follows day, we're going to have another tax reform debate, because something does have to be done. And I once again give a quick plug to my own podcast. If you search Leopoldo Ferguson podcast, I guess, well, maybe he's done a few, but he did one with me last year. And he had some very good points on what Colombia could do to get more tax revenue, but also kind of bring those upper echelons to make them kind of feel more responsible for their own, for the lower classes as well, kind of bring everybody almost on the same boat in one sense. But check that podcast out with Leopoldo Ferguson. I guess I could probably post it on the comment link. But what I was going to say, or ask you there, Ollie, so we've got another few kind of grievances in this as well. One of them is, and these are things that if people are listening, because it's not clear what exactly the bodies behind the strike are exactly calling for. They've got bullet points, but to delve a little bit deeper into it, tuition fees, they've come up. Matricula zero is what they come. So they're saying no tuition fees, but in what kind of context? I mean, if Oliver Pritchard in his Strato 6 in his mansion or whatever sends his young one off to school. Well, are they okay, but bottom line is, what I'm just saying, are they looking for complete free third level education, which, for example, in Ireland, everybody's your primary degree, your primary undergraduate degree, is free, in inverted commas. There are certain administration fees that some families, if you're above a certain threshold, will have to pay. But if you're below that threshold, you will pretty much pay nothing to have your first, your undergrad degree. So, I'd like to know what exactly they are looking for, because again, this will all come back to money and revenue and what's in the coffers. And then the other thing is, so there's the tuition fees on one side that I've seen. Obviously, they've talked about returning to economic activity and protecting small and medium enterprises, all that kind of stuff that you would expect kind of in the riffraff of grievances, and not to belittle them at all. But the other one then is that renta básica. Now, I don't think that's exactly universal basic income. That, is there any country doing that full time right now? I guess what they're looking for is a better social welfare system. That would seem to be. Now, if you're okay, go on.
I agree with you. I cannot believe they can't possibly be proposing a true renta básica, a true universal basic income. They surely mean for the some kind of means tested, whether that's through the suspend system or whether that's through strata or however they administer it. But they can't possibly be saying, oh yeah, we'll give out a minimum wage to everybody in the country. That can't be right. That just can't be.
Yeah, well, you would imagine not so. But again, not to kind of keep on harping on about this, but in that reforma tributaria, this solidario, ingreso solidario that came in during the pandemic, one of the measures, I don't think it was 100% clear, but maybe that would be continued indefinitely to give those poorer families some sort of assistance. So what are the people behind the strike? Okay, they didn't like other aspects of this, so they chucked the whole thing out. But surely in a future tax reform proposal, that's another measure that they're going to look like. If you're trying to, equal out the country a little bit and have a better redistribution of wealth.
Yeah, I mean, look, I would assume that's a vote winner. I can't believe it's not a vote winner. It's got to be a vote winner. But, there's no way. But the question is, Brendan, how do you pay for it?
Well, this is it, exactly. Where does the money come
back to your point, yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody was looking at the tax reforms and saying, we don't like the spending proposals. I don't think that was ever an issue. What they didn't like is the bit where you have to pay, which leaves us in a rather invidious situation, which basically is we either raise taxes one way or another, and it doesn't matter where you raise them. You might raise them through IVA, you might raise them through corporation tax, you might raise them through extra income tax, broadening the base, whatever. It doesn't really matter where that comes from. But you have to get that tax money from somewhere. Or, if you can't do that, you have to cut spending. That's not going to be very popular. Or in this case, not bring in spending. Don't bring in the ingreso solidario, but also you'll still have to make cuts. Or there is a third option, which is, issue bonds and the like. But you can't issue bonds because they're going into junk status territory. In fact, they're already trading like junk. They're not officially junk, but they essentially are. So that's already on its downward spiral. I guess the fourth option is, find a massive gold mine in an Andean mountain and nationalize it.
By the way, just on energy, of course, that's always important. I remember a few of my students telling me that Colombia is quite progressive in terms of renewable energies via dams and like that. So they might be ahead of the Latin America pack in that regard anyway.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the elephant in the room in the renewables discussion is always, of course, Hidroituango.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, and a certain Sergio Fajardo as well embroiled in all of that, because I do want to get to the kind of politics behind this, and maybe that's a nice little segue. But also just in terms of, this is something that came up in other comments and with the article that I wrote as well, that the makeup of the protest, I was engaged in a little Twitter feedback, or comment, we should say, a little tit for tat, that's the word I was looking for, with a guy. Like I had said, that the numbers were relatively small in a Bogotá context. It wasn't like you had massive numbers on the street in the last few days. And he was there like, surely if you add them all up, it comes to like a few 100,000. I would certainly say not that many. So like leading on from that, how representative are these protesters of the country at large? I mean, are there many people sitting at home or in their fincas, wherever they are now working from home, and kind of rather indifferent to all of this?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it, Brendan? Yeah, absolutely. Well, we saw last week it wasn't necessarily representative. Yesterday was a lot more representative. I saw plenty of average people out and about. This morning, very much back to the hardcore protesters, a few students, and then, the traditional dance people. Which is nice. I mean, traditional dance is definitely not the end of the world. It's nice, it's pleasant, it's nice to look at. But it's a far cry from calling for revolution, calling for the resignation of the president, etc. And it was markedly less political today. It was much more like a carnival, a very sparsely attended carnival. Now, one of our contributors at the Bogotá Post commented in the week. He said, well, once we get belatones and besatones and things like that, that's where the movement starts dying. That's the start of the end. And we have seen belatones, which are mass candlelight vigils. We've seen those popping up. And again, when you see more traditional dance and less banner making and banner waving, that's usually not a good sign for the health of the protests.
Well, and again, this might sound like I'm being a little bit facetious or flippant with the whole thing, but like, it's a Thursday. It's been going on a week now. Mother's Day is officially this Sunday, even though, there is a pandemic still going on here. You might forget about that. And Claudia Lopez has asked people not to celebrate Mother's Day, but we'll see how that one plays out, especially considering that restrictions have been eased in Bogota for the weekend that's in it. So just to something very visual, perhaps. Yesterday I was at Portal Norte in the lashing rain. Well, it started lashing rain. It wasn't at the start, but it was a very dull, cold evening. And protesters blocked both costados, both sides, northbound and southbound, just slightly north of the Portal Norte, so blocking traffic in both directions. Maybe you had about, I'm not very good at guessing crowd sizes, but maybe 200 to 300. Today, it was just a group of students on the southbound side. The northbound lane was open, so traffic going south was restricted, but they left one lane open so it could still move. Again, so maybe a sign that it is just gradually getting smaller. And of course, to mention, I alluded to this in the introduction, there are talks due to take place on Monday between a government representative and those supposedly leading the strike, those different work unions and whatever. So that's, yeah. Were you going to say something? But that's a sign.
Yeah, but that's the thing. I mean, this isn't about that anymore. Once they started killing civilians. Once civilians started dying at the hands of state actors, once things like internet cuts in Cali kicked off, things like that, we're seeing helicopters full of military being helicoptered in and commandeering private schools and stuff like that. Once we're in that situation, Brendan, it stops becoming about the initial aims and it starts becoming about the please can you not be killing us stage.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. Well, I was just going to.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, but I was going to say that there's been the three big reforms of late. Obviously, the tax reform, health reform, and now it's this idea of police reform. Like, can we not have a police? First of all, that's practically another military and a law unto itself. Mm-hmm. That's the other side of it. And we were promised that would be looked at after the killing of Harry Ordóñez, our kind of George Floyd moment here in Bogota in September, but nothing's come of it. Just Richard's written in there to give Richard historian Stoller, we'll call him, the man who seems to know everything about Colombia. But I don't think people are clamoring for the ingreso solidario, the basic income. They just want corrupt spending eliminated, the spending that produces only private rather than public benefits. Again, Richard, I would point you in the direction of Leopoldo Ferguson. He's got like some very interesting ideas in terms of how you address that balance, in terms of you've got more private security guards in this country than you have actually a police force and things like that, in terms of you address that balance between public-private. And then he's telling us that in the northern Tolima, which is one of those hinterland places, they burned down a new peaje and it was a real collective enterprise, not agitators. Grievances are everywhere because the abusive state is everywhere. And I guess maybe in Bogota, because we are in the capital, the center of operations, in the periphery, we are ignorant of it, as the locals are here a lot of the time, and we are too, because we live and work here. And it's that, it brings it back to the British economist and social scientist James Robinson, who I also interviewed, but he puts it that Colombia, in his book, The Narrow Corridor, and he talks about, that countries need to follow that narrow corridor in terms of a kind of political spectrum and how you organize the country. He talks about Colombia both being a weak state and a weak society. And I guess in the periphery, that's where you really see it, and where the state is very weak, and maybe there's not much great collective action, although that's contradicting what Richard says, that they did get together to burn this Piaje, but maybe they'll set it up themselves afterwards. I don't know, any thoughts on that, Ollie?
Well, I take issue with... I think Richard's absolutely right when he says people want corrupt spending eliminated. I think he's right. I think people do want that. But I would say people want that in the same way as they want money trees. You can want corrupt spending to be eliminated, but the only way you're going to do that is by eliminating all spending. Look, the simple fact of the matter is, the spending that gets cut first won't be the corrupt spending. It'll be the money that's paid out to single mothers. It'll be the money that's paid out in transport subsidies for poor students. It'll be the money that goes towards the national universities, the money that goes towards the widely disliked but still does a good job ESATEX, etc., etc. That's where the money will be taken away from first. You know, the spending on the military will be ring-fenced until absolute dire emergency. The spending on MPs' salaries will be ring-fenced until they really can't protect it anymore. The money that's siphoned away through all kinds of death by 1,000 cuts here and here and here and here and here, that will be the last to go, without a shadow of doubt. One of my main reasons for building the tax base is that I don't think corruption is a percentage of your total. I think corruption is a certain set number, more or less, and it only increases a little as GDP goes up. But anyway, we'll see.
No, well, no, it's an interesting.
And by the way, on the subject of Piajes, Piajes to me are one of the best tolls you can possibly. They're one of the best tax money raising things. I mean, it's a brilliant system. Poor people travel on buses; they pay comparatively little to the Piaje. Rich people travel in private cars; they pay comparatively quite a lot. People living in big cities have to pay a little bit extra on their goods because of the extra cost of trucking them in. All of those things seem entirely fair to me, in that we have to pay for that road. That road won't get built by magic. It has to be paved somehow. And if we're going to raise money to build that road, I think one of the best ways to raise it is by introducing a kind of semi-progressive tax that says, yeah, the rich people driving in one person to a car, they pay more than the people coming in by bus.
Yeah, of course, there was the proposal in that tax reform to have these peajes, or toll bridges as we call them in English, in the actual cities, so city tolls as well. So I guess kind of like a congestion charge like they have in other cities around the world. They do have one in London, I believe. Now, I think Richard maybe wants to take my place. He says, Ollie, you're right, and then screw it all, and we should just bring back the guerrillas. He's describing a regime that isn't susceptible to peaceful reform.
No, it is. I think we just need to be honest about what corruption is. There's often this idea that we can get rid of corruption. Show me a country that's done that. That hasn't happened anywhere in the world. You can minimize corruption a bit. You can increase equality. You can do all these things. But fundamentally, the best way to get corruption down as a percentage of your total GDP, best way that's been proven by country after country after country, is just get more money in the economy in general, and then people don't feel like they have to be so corrupt.
Yeah, Richard, come on. I mean, I'm not sure you're a fan of The Simpsons, but Mayor Quimby, that famous thing like, oh, did I hear a briefcase opening? I mean, the United States has its fair amount of corruption as well. And
massively high. I mean, again, this is one of the things the Colombians always talk as though corruption in Colombia is this unique thing that afflicts Colombia and doesn't afflict other countries. Colombia is less corrupt than any of its neighbors. And whenever I tell people that, they go, no, it can't be true, all of it can't be true. I say, well, Transparency International are the only people who credibly do investigation into corruption on a worldwide scale. And they consistently rank Panama, Ecuador, Venezuela, obviously, that shouldn't be a surprise, Brazil and Peru below Colombia.
I was going to put on my radical socialist hat there and say the only reason Venezuela is corrupt is because of the sanctions that the US have imposed on them. Otherwise, it would be a prime example to live by. Of course, I jest, but yeah, and I was going to mention also, of course, inequality in the US. You know, I understand the other side of the argument. I was talking to a libertarian about this the other day. You know, and their view is that, well, you know, to heck with taxes, to heck with all that, just we'd prefer to go private and keep it that way. And I think there's a lot of people in the upper echelons in this country who actually, if you really dragged it out of them, would probably feel the same way. It's like, well, we prefer to keep it the way it is. I've got my holiday to Florida, you know, 3 or 4 times a week, and I'm kind of not too bothered about investing too much more in this country as long as everything functions for me. You could say that's being cynical. I don't know, but that's my point. And Alexandra, we were worried. We thought maybe something had happened to you, but she's checked in with us, and she says she's surprised the pensionados are not out protesting. Maybe that's something to do with the pandemic, but do pensioners tend to go out and on the streets and protest?
I have seen very few of my time in Colombia. I would say this, though, Brendan. You know, if you're a pensioner it depends what kind of pensioner you are. There are quite a lot of absolute blood-sucking leeches on the Colombian system, and then there are lots of people who are completely abandoned. And I think, if you are a certain kind of pensioner, absolutely protest any change in Colombian life, because you are living high off the hog, and you know your pension should be taken away from you, and it won't be, because that's not popular. I find that utterly bizarre. One of the things my students continually underestimate when I talk to them is the sheer scale of Colombia's pension responsibility, which is absolutely off the scale. It is huge. And one of the interesting things about the tax reform, incidentally, is that they ring-fenced politicians' pensions, obviously, top generals, but also people like university professors and the like. And the amount of money Colombia pays out to these people is considerable. Top civil servants as well. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're paying taxes in Colombia, you're paying a lot of ex-presidents, ex-senators, ex-teachers, ex-generals, ex-policemen, etc., etc.
Well, you know, the argument might be on their side is that they paid their taxes as well in the day, and they worked for the state, and now they want to put their feet up and enjoy retirement. Although I did make a comment in another article the other day, I'll be lucky enough, I think, if I get to 60 and have a pension at this stage, the way things are going. Problems for us young millennials, and people are playing a small violin, I'm sure. Now, we either have 11 minutes left going by the time of the actual show, or because we started a little bit late due to problems outside of my control. Sophomore, if you're watching, we'll go to an hour on the live red button, if that's okay. Because a couple of things, you're monitoring the messages, but there's another few angles I want to go on here. Again, just going by comments I've received. Like, is it advisable we said today seemed like in Bogotá anyway that things were kind of returning, it's petering out these protests. But if people wanted to get away at the weekend, travel, there have been blockades. Richard mentioned the burning of a toll and that. Like, would it be best maybe if people have plans to get away overland to put them on hold for a week or something? Do you think, Ollie? Have you heard anything about that?
I wouldn't be recommending travelling. Certainly, it doesn't seem that we can get. It wouldn't seem that we can get sort of basic products into certain shops. So I don't know how easy it is for people to get through. Certainly there's roadblocks at certain points. So it's hard to say. On the other hand, I've heard of people getting into Cali and the like. So, swings and roundabouts. I suppose it depends how brave you are, comes down to it.
Okay.
But actually something I'd like to talk about, Brendan, just take it away slightly, is basically what's been happening on the ground. What we've actually seen, how things have actually gone down. We've seen all these dramatic images. I was at the protests today and yesterday. Today really was nothing. Yesterday started, it was a real carnival atmosphere. It was quite boozy, if we're honest. There was certainly plenty of beer being kicked about, that was for sure. It was a fun, happy, passionate, I would say, would be my description of the start of it. Obviously, the rain quelled things a bit. But I'd say for the most part, yesterday was largely peaceful. Somebody was flashing around a knife, up on the Septima. There was kind of a dispute over some cigarettes or something.
As you do.
There were a couple of naughty-looking types around. But generally speaking, it was a good-natured, yet passionate and forceful debate. And also, let's be honest here, disorganised and splintering. And that's not what the police like to see. Because if you've got some people coming south on Septima and other people going north, if you're a police person, you're thinking, which way do we go? Or do we stay in the middle? How do we control? If everyone's in one place, it's a lot easier to police. But again, they seem to go out of their way to avoid that. Having said that, we had correspondents down in the Plaza de Bolivar, and there was heavy provocation of ESMAD before they cleared the square. Be under no illusions. When people say the protests are nothing but vandals, that's definitely not true. There are definitely lots of people out there who don't want to demonstrate in that way. However, you also can't say there were no vandals and they were all acting peacefully and ESMAD arrived out of nowhere. That's also definitely not true. It's certainly the case that there was heavy provocation. Stones being thrown, a half-hearted attempt to storm the Senate building. That's quite worrying.
Yeah, and of course, added to that, you had the attacks on CAIs, the small police stations dotted around all over Bogota, and one of them down the south where there were 15 officers inside and they'd received injuries. Now, of course, the CAIs were the focus of attention in the September protests because, of course, those protests came out of the killing of Javier Ordóñez at the hands of police brutality. But there are those incidents. Now, just from my own perspective here up in Portal Norte yesterday, there were no police at all near this protest that blocked both sides of the autopista going north and going south, southbound, northbound. None at all, not one. So it was pretty, they were singing, dancing, jumping up and down. Most were students. Like I didn't see any, how will I put this diplomatically, any kind of estrato, one or two guys that aren't students, put it that way, there. They were mostly kind of your typical Nacional university student guy or whatever, protesting. Today, a smaller affair, but there were some riot police and other police just there on standby watching. They weren't getting involved or anything. So all this side of the city, it's been relatively peaceful from what I've seen. Obviously, I haven't seen it all, but from what I saw, it has been relatively peaceful. By the way, yep.
Sorry, the policing down at the Parque Nacional was sensible yesterday, and at Park Hippies as well. It was sensible. The policing today was literally again non-existent. There were no police. We saw military in the morning strolling about. After that, they disappeared, God knows where to. We didn't see anything from the security forces. Rob McKenzie is asking here, were those attacks on ESMAD by infiltrados? No. Well, okay, we have two options here. It's possible that everybody there was an infiltrado. I suppose that's possible. That seems very unlikely. I'm certainly not discounting the possibility that infiltrados were there. It does definitely seem like the vast majority of people throwing stones, at least, would be regular protesters. Who, by the way, I mean, this is standard procedure for them. It's not like this is unknown in Colombia.
What, to throw stones, you mean? Stuff like that. Yeah. Well, I mean, and again, it's this thing, and Rob, I don't know if you were listening to the very start of the show, but you can go back. I mean, we were talking about this. I mean, how do you tell who is an infiltrado, who is planted there? There's a lot of misinformation going around. It's difficult to know in that. Like, so, hey, sorry, can I ask you a question? Have you been planted here by the police? I'm sure you'd get an answer, and not kind of belittling the question, but yeah, it's difficult to know. By the way, and Rob, well, you're also saying that there are intermittent roadblocks all over Colombia. Well, that's fair enough. I was kind of half asking for myself because I was meant to get away for the first time in 15 months on Monday to go to close to Armenia. Now I'm thinking, God, will I have to postpone that? We shall see. Richard, we might take you up on that. You want a discussion as whether these protests will change?
That's fascinating.
And I'll give you my short answer right now. Not a chance. It won't change much when it comes to election time. Strong rhetoric, but whoever votes, they don't seem to be listening. And
hang on. I would say Richard does. It's such an interesting question, and it is something we'll come back to later. Very quickly, what I'd say is, who do you vote for?
Well, yeah, but I think there is, and we talked about this yesterday when we were doing our planning. Like, there's, there is that silent centre, the Democratic majority, number one, but then that centrist vote that could never contemplate voting for Petro. And I don't think these protests are going to change that. No. So well, look, in a year we're meant to have a playoff. In terms of, we'll find out where those votes are going to go. I think our producer is writing to us frantically. He didn't get my message when I said.
I thought we were trying. We were just. I thought we were going to pretend we hadn't seen that.
All right. Well, we will then. He doesn't understand English.
Rob McKenzie does point out that he says it's verging on conspiracy theory territory. You see, again, normally I would say yes, but frankly, we've seen so much in Colombia, even in the relatively short time I've been here. I would say that absolutely, I'm willing to believe it. I certainly think infiltrados exist. I think there's no doubt that. And actually, when we talk about these people that we've seen, for example, in Cali, but also in Bogotá, around the country, we've got this extremely disturbing incident in Pereira that actually I think it's incredibly worrying that we see all these people in civilian uniforms, apparently affiliated to the police. And what's very worrying is people say, it's police in civil uniforms. I think there might be something a lot more sinister there. I think these could absolutely be proper paramilitaries. And that's...
Actually, you're not the first person to say that. I heard that being said today. Sorry if I was a bit distracted because our producer is telling us that we are
really
at time here. Okay. I think he wants to go to bed. But by the way, that point that Richard made about discussing about maybe the future direction of elections and things like that. We are going to do an episode on Colombian politics in general, the different parties, the actors at play, how it's evolved from a two-party system to this multi-party system we have these days. That's to come, guys. Thanks for listening. Remember, you can listen back to this via Facebook, and it will be available on YouTube in the morning. But until next week, ciao.
Bye.